Hi there. This is Dr. John Whitcomb for News and Nutrition talking about oxalates, the poison you really haven't heard much about. Ever heard of oxalates? You may have, because if you've had a kidney stone, 75% chance it's made of calcium oxalate. But otherwise, you probably haven't heard much about them. You might have heard that they cause trouble in some people, and there's a genetic defect where you make too much oxalates. There's rare people who have hyperoxaluria and make about 500 milligrams a day. But a normal human being makes about 25 milligrams of oxalate in the process of digesting two amino acids. And it's a metabolic byproduct. We get rid of it, pee it out. Plants have a different operating system. They use oxalates. Turns out that if they put high levels of oxalates in their leaves, they can keep some caterpillars and insects from eating their leaves. So rhubarb leaves have a high level of oxalate in them, as does spinach. Not only that, but plant oxalates can chelate quite a few chemicals. It does calcium, which is why it ends up making calcium stones. But plants use oxalates because they can live in an environment where there are noxious amounts of heavy metals in the soil. And this allows them to live in places like that. So plants use oxalate as a way of helping them live in their various environments. Well, what happens? We make 25 milligrams a day. What happens if we make more than that? What happens if we eat more than that? Well, it turns out that you can get a lot more oxalates in your diet by the food we eat. And there's quite a few illnesses that are associated with that. For example, 9% of Americans have had kidney stones, and they are most of the time associated with oxalate. But if we go looking and do autopsy studies, we found that 79% of thyroid glands in autopsy have oxalate crystals in them. Do you know that women with vulvodynia, just painful perineum and painful intercourse, there's a lot of anecdotal history suggesting that an oxalate-low diet will make them feel better. Did you know that if you look at women with calcified little calcifications in their breasts, they've got oxalate crystals in those calcifications. That's what's setting off the calcifications. In fact, there's editorials now in the breast literature suggesting that women should be on low oxalate diets if they have DCIS or any form of calcification. Well, that's just about half of women in America are having biopsies in their breasts because of micro-calcifications. This isn't rare. The concept that's aroused here is Bruce Ames' triage theory. Bruce Ames was a famous functional medicine doctor who sort of started starting this whole movement. And his triage theory says you don't get in trouble when you have a mild to moderate deficiency until it becomes the life-threatening deficiency. Okay? But the flip side of that would be is you don't get into trouble with mild, moderate poisoning until you get to the severe poisoning. But in the long haul, it wears you down. Death by 1,000 cuts. So the poison, it's death by 1,000 cuts. Now, Stephen Gundry has said that lectins that plants make are a problem that our immune system responds to, and we need to avoid lectins. But Paul Saladino, in his brilliant book, The Carnivore Code, gives you a lovely discussion on how oxalates are also in plants and suggest that maybe we're designed to eat more animal than we thought. But oxalates is certainly a problem. Now, just about every website talks about that, and that there's some risk you're taking with that. But what will work for me? Next week I'm going to talk about where we get all these oxalates from. But for now, recognize you don't want to have oxalates. You need to know about them. They aren't just a minor problem, and I think they are vastly understudied. I think the idea of death by 1,000 cuts is something we really haven't considered. What woke me up was all those micro-calcifications in women's breasts. 50% of us are terrified of that. Dr. Whitcomb for News and Nutrition. Oxalates, you don't want them.